Hello, everyone. My name is Joanna Kowalewska, and I am so honored and excited to be speaking today with Toko-pa Turner, a Canadian author, teacher, and of course, a dream worker that blends the mystical tradition of Sufis with Jungian approach to dream and so much more. So, welcome, Toko-pa. I'm so glad you are here today.
Oh, it's a delight to be with you, Joanna. Thank you for inviting me.
So, would it be okay if we started our conversation with you telling us a little bit about your childhood, about your upbringing? Because I find it really fascinating. And for people maybe that are not familiar with you and your work, I think that would be a pretty great place to start.
Well, that's a very big topic. Um, well, I guess probably the thing that's most relevant to share here in this context is that I have this strange confluence of influences in my upbringing because I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, but also I was raised in a Sufi commune. So I have this mix of, Judaism and Islam but more in the mystical traditions is what I was raised with. And um, what I've discovered as an adult is that there are a lot of similarities in the mystical traditions from around the world. So from this very young age, I had these very vivid dreams. And you could even say that they were more than dreams in the sense that I had profound life-altering experiences in what you might call the dream space, or on the astral planes. And and this made me fascinated from far back as I can remember about dreams. And I lived in such a way that the people that were around me encouraged me to share what I dreamed about. So there wasn't that kind of ingrained stigma that we often have in modern households that say, oh, it's just a dream, it's just nonsense, it doesn't mean anything. I didn't really have that growing up. So instead, I was encouraged to become curious about my dreams. Um, and then the very sort of fast forward version of my childhood is that it became quite turbulent. There was a lot of violence in my home, which may surprise people given what I've just told them about my upbringing. But there was this shadow aspect. And so I ended up leaving home at a very young age. I was probably 14 the first time I ran away from home, and then I was completely successful at it by the time I was 15. Um, and so I lived independently. I lived for a while in the group home
Mhm.
system in Canada, and then ended up living independently by the time I was 16. And the reason why I share that part of my story is because without having a kind of parental guidance system, I found that I instinctively turned towards journaling. And as I kept to journal, it was natural for me to record my dreams. And I didn't understand really the language of dreams at that age, but there was magic there. So I would have this experience of dreams or dream images spilling out into waking life in the form of synchronicities and clues and these sorts of things. And though my life was very hard for a huge chunk of those years, well into adulthood, because I sort of had to roll up my sleeves and do everything myself. And I didn't have a lot of the privileges most people grew up with. Um, I did have this profound connection to the other world. And that really matured for me in my late teens. I was about, I think, 19 years old when I discovered Carl Jung.
Mm.
And that was when this sort of ephemeral, magical relationship that I had with dreams was given a language. It was given structure that I didn't know existed. And that was big for me because I discovered that there was this society of, a kind of subculture of people who were as obsessed and fascinated and reverent towards dreams
Yeah.
as I was. And that was it for me. I went deep on, analytical psychology and everything Jungian. And I ended up sort of ingratiating myself into the community. I lived in Ontario at the time where there's a very established Jungian
Mm.
foundation. And I ended up becoming an intern there and attending many lectures and workshops and classes. Um, at this point, I'm telling you my whole life story, but let's just say I'll end the story by saying that I also found that the academic world
Yeah.
had limitations for me, that those mystical origins in which I was raised caused me to bristle against some of the rigidity of the structured language and frameworks of even Jungian psychology, which I think is based in a lot of mysticism and is very hospitable to the mystical perspective. But still, I found there were um, uh, let's say, limitations that I came up against that eventually, with my career in dreams, I have tried to push against. I mean, rattling the fence, both with language, but also with the way that I work with dreams, and eventually ended up developing a very personal and experimental relationship with my own dreams. And then
Yeah.
going on to teach others what I learned.
Yeah. So from this journey, from your childhood through the studying of Jung, you developed your own way of building a relationship with dreams, right? And you established some sort of keys that help us connect to the dream and understand them. Would you like to share some of them, and maybe also the way, because I know that from what I read and heard you speaking, was that you are also not a big fan of calling it dream analysis or dream interpretation, that this is also limiting in a way. It limits our relationship with our dreams. So would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. It's so fun to speak to another dream enthusiast and practitioner because, I could get on this soapbox for days. But I'm very passionate about this topic. So, after years and years of studying analytical psychology and getting really deep into those academic frameworks, um, I would notice that when I was working with other people and even for myself, that there were always defiances in the dream that would resist. Dreams would resist being put into various boxes, that they were always bending the rules of the established frameworks. And so I became interested in those exceptions. And I think what I wanted to do is to rescue mm, legitimate dream work practice out of those academic ivory towers, and bring the language or framework around dream work into a way that is into language and accessibility for everyone, but not in such a way that it falls into that other group, which is sort of, superstitious and woo-woo and kind of fluffy. And because there's a lot of nonsense out there also, like I'd say if you go to any bookstore and you look at the DreamWorks section, there's a huge portion of
Yes.
those books that are essentially just nonsense. And that's unfortunate because I think it's changing now. But when I was growing up and starting in this field, I think there was a lot of assumptions about anybody who worked in this field that it was just kind of like superstitious nonsense, you know.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to occupy that space in between. And so what I found was that there were, to really get a dream to open up its wisdom to us, that there were these keys, as you called them, because that's the language I use as well, that when we use those attitudes and practices, that it will be conducive to the dream, and the dream will begin to reveal its depths to us. And so I call my method for working with dreams the courtship method. And I think of it like a courtship because you really are dealing with something that has its own living system,
Yeah.
that has its own preferences, that has its own inclinations, that has its own intelligence. And I sort of use the metaphor of uh, mm, having a lover. Because when you approach a lover, there are certain things that certain ways in which you can behave that will inspire the lover to open up their intimacy to you. And
Yeah.
it's just like this with dream work. And there are other things that get that being to shut down. And a big thing that will get a dream to shut down is anything to do with academic language. So
Hmm.
if you're working with a dreamer, for instance, and you say, oh, maybe that's your negative mother complex, something like that, the dream will just completely shut down because it puts us into a mental space that is defensive, but also is sort of rationalistic in
Yeah.
nature as opposed to heart-centered. So the courtship method, I've sort of identified what I think are 5 keys. And I've written a book about it. It's called The Dreaming Way. And the dreaming way is not like this is my system. It's more like the dream has a way. The
Yeah.
dream has a way like a river that it wants to move, that is in cooperation with um, with the rhythms and energy of the earth itself, with nature itself. And our job is to come into alignment or into attunement with that energy, with that way. And so, how do we do that? So, the first key, and perhaps the most important, is really listening and being curious. And many of these keys are deceptively simple. Um, because maybe you've had this experience that when you listen to someone tell a dream, part of you kind of wants to fall asleep. It feels boring or like hard to pin down. And so I think what's happening here is that when we listen to a dream, we're so used to orienting ourselves in rationalistic language, rationalistic perspective, that we have this the imaginal faculty has actually atrophied. We've lost the ability to not lost, but let's say it's not as strong as it could be. The ability to perceive and understand this other kind of language, which speaks in the language of
Yeah.
symbols, which speaks in the language of metaphor. But also, the other thing that's happening is that when somebody tells us a dream, it activates our own dreaming faculty. So we start thinking of our own dreams that we had last night. We start, going into a dreaming space. And it short circuits our ability to truly listen,
Mm,
truly show up for the dream that's being shared, um, and to listen with a kind of embodied presence. And so this is the first thing that I teach is about learning how to um, mm, be attentive to not only the dream that's being shared, but to all of the things that are happening into your own body and dreaming soul
mm,
system, and to take them and just gently put them to the side so you can maintain an embodied presence. And this means listening not only to the dream material, and if you're working with yourself, it's also paying attention to the dreams, prima materia, its original statement, its language
yeah.
itself, without having it trigger all of these other processes like your bodily reactions, your resistances to certain images, your overt rejection to certain taboos that appear in the dream, your fears that come up as you encounter these things. And so just learning to make those discernments, not to um, discard them, but to simply put them to the side and say hello to them, but put them to the side so you can keep showing up with presence for the dream itself. Enough to the point where if you're having your own dreaming, that you can write it down in your journal with as much accuracy and attentiveness to the dream experience itself. Um, first. That's the very first thing. And if you're working with somebody else's dream, same thing. To hear in as much detail what is being said, what is not being said,
Mm.
what is being omitted, so that you can come back later to the second key with your curiosity, which is a process of really asking questions. And so, clearly we don't have enough time to go through
Of
all
course.
of the five keys here, but that's just an example of the beginning of a courtship process. You imagine you have this lover that you want to get to know better. And the first thing you want to do is, circle,
Yeah.
circle the lover and try to discover what they have to say, what their unique perspective is, what they love, what they long for. And hopefully, in that process, you're going to get a little closer to the object of your affection, enough to begin to ask more questions so that you can get to that deeper layer of circling, of questioning. Um, yeah, so that's just a
Yeah.
brief introduction. But
It makes me think about that actually this process, these keys, we can apply them to any relationship, to when we relate to anything or anyone in our waking state, right? Because what you're saying, starting with listening, with actually wanted to hear, it's something so basic yet so important, right? How do you build any relationship if you don't do that with the partner, with the friend, with the family member, with the animal, right? We spoke about animals before. So it feels to me like it's just also an incredible, way of actually relating to everything and everyone around us.
absolutely, and as you say that, I'm aware of how rare that
Yes.
is. It's rare to meet people who listen with that kind of embodied presence. Mostly there's a kind of urgency to say the thing that's on your mind, to give somebody else your perspective. And often I think loneliness is born out of that sense of chronically feeling unseen or unheard. And you've
Mm.
touched on something that I think is maybe one of the most exciting and remarkable things about dream work is that the skills that we are learning in dream work are actually skills for living in relationship with the rest of the human and more than human world all around us. And that's a complexity we can't get into very much detail here, but every single one of these keys that I've been taught by my dreams, I have seen what a profound and transformative effect it could have. If everyone were practicing dream work, it would um, shape us in such a way symmetrically that we would bring those skills naturally into our relationship, into our community, into even relations across borders, and into the more than human world, which we often think of as a backdrop, which is actually our extended family. So I find that incredibly remarkable that these skills that we're building in DreamWork are skills for being a human being.
Yeah, and what you just said about that maybe one of the biggest cause why so many of us feel lonely, feel not belonging, is that we feel we're not being heard or we are not being listened to. We have no one to speak to. And so, how do you think that dream work in our community? Do you think that it actually could be a remedy for this type of loneliness and disconnection?
100%, 100%. And this is how I know. When we occasionally have these gatherings, retreats, events, things like this, where and even beyond anything that I would host personally, where groups of people come together, small groups of people come together to share their dreams. And what we find are a series of remarkable discoveries. The first is that the intimacy
Yeah.
that is born out of this depth of sharing is unlike any other activity on earth that I have experienced. The bonds are so incredibly deep. And I think it's because the images that are born out of each individual soul are so uniquely and perfectly tailored to that person's particular um, energetic signature and inclination. It's like their pattern that maybe can't be expressed as easily in words or in, even years of small talk in
Yeah.
acquaintanceship or even in friendship sometimes. So here you have this, like the birth of these symbols that are so uniquely that person that it allows us to see each other in a more direct a way than any other experience can. So that's level one, is just we begin to share this lexicon of
Yeah.
images, right? Like when I'm talking to you now, I can say, oh, remember the cat, or, remember the house on fire, or whatever it is that
Yeah.
came up in your dream becomes our shared language that goes right to the heart of a thing that would take 1,000 words to explain, but now we both understand because we've already done that work together. But here's the next remarkable thing is that we discover when we work in groups that the images that come out of our dreams are shared in a group, that
Yeah.
there are certain images it doesn't matter where you bring the group together, they could be from different parts of the world. And when they come together, okay, so this is a true miracle that is like quantum physics. You can't explain
You
it, and
can.
yet it is a thing that when you bring this group together, certain themes will pop up in that group as if we are a psychic ecosystem who needs to work something out together. What is that miracle? Again and again and again, I see it. And for me, it's normal because I've
Yes.
seen it so many times. I just rely on it. But for most people, don't even have that experience. So this is what happens. These groups become friends for life. I've seen more often than not people in dream sharing groups, if given a structure to continue meeting with ethical boundaries
Yeah.
around dream work and some tools, that they become friends for life,
Mm.
whether it's over Zoom or in person or whatever, because of these reasons. And I'll just say one more thing about this. This is the way it was always supposed to be. And indigenous cultures around the world, in every part of the world, always, as a matter of course, shared their dreams. We in, well, what you could say, developed countries, Western civilization, whatever you want to call it, I don't even know what it's called these days, in a way that makes sense for everyone. But let's say modernity, let's put it
Yeah.
that way as a blanket term, are the only ones who do not do this on the whole. Of course, some people do. And this is a very sad thing because it's essential and it should be this way. And I've spent my life so far trying to encourage people to do this, but I understand that we're working against hundreds of years of indoctrination around dreams, are nonsense. They're just, the brain defragging waking life or storing memory capacities, or dreams are just products of the brain, which is housed inside the skeletal scaffolding. I mean, it's really
Yeah.
not that. People have forgotten the magical, mystical, unifying quantum nature of dreaming.
Yes.
Okay, that's my little diatribe.
It's so true because I'm also thinking like you talk about this, it's really been hundreds of years that we stopped our relationship with dreams, and it even went to the point like in some cultures or religious it's even maybe dangerous, or maybe it's like some
Yeah.
evil spirits talking through you, so it's better not to pay attention to that, especially if you have nightmares. That's for sure something bad. And like people are being scared and being indoctrinated this way. And I also say the same thing that you just said, that how come then in every holy book, in every culture, in every part of the world, when people had no connection one with the another, there was no communication between Africa and Australia, and yet in all these tribes, you see in one way or another, in different ways, there was a shaman, they were sharing circles, they were, I don't know, but it was sacred, and it is no longer sacred. And this is exactly the reasons that I'm being told is that it's not, because or it's the scientific talk that it's just our mind processing the day that just happened, or that it's just some woo-woo thing, and that's just not worth our time. And I say it cannot be, because I personally had such dreams that altered my path, my life in ways that I cannot explain. So it cannot be. And I'm not only person that experienced that. So it's like your personal experience against some like scientific talk or paper or something. And sometimes it feels very discouraging that you want to bring this knowledge, this gift to other people, and you really want to say, hey, like technology is taking over, like we are really losing the connection not only to our dreams but also to nature, to our intuition. Now we outsource everything. Now with the chat GPT, it's like it's even crazier. Like we don't need to think for ourselves anymore. We just ask the computer, the algorithm, to give us the answer. And I say so many answers, especially related to you, your life, your path, your purpose, they are inside of you. So why to constantly keep looking outside for those answers.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You're preaching to the choir. Um, I think, we've had so many centuries of secularism and rationalism that there is a natural aversion that's developed out of that. And the pendulum will have to swing. And I do believe it's beginning to swing. I have a couple of decades on you. So I will say that things have improved. When
Yeah.
I at the beginning of my professional career working with dreams, I mean, it was a lot worse than it is now. And now there's a lot of receptivity to it as well. And I think that's growing. I think people are becoming more interested in um, uh, the imagination and what it can do and how it connects to the intelligence and wisdom of all of nature. But the threats you're speaking of, especially the technological ones, are real and they're, sometimes I feel insurmountable. Um, because the addictive quality of them is really as severe as hard drugs. And it's in our pockets. It's so accessible all the time. Um, and it takes enormous discipline to choose a different way of being in life. And it's getting harder and harder because I think many, it's systemic. So there are many things that in order to function in the world, we
Yeah.
have to have the
Yes.
smartphone because we need the, two-factor authentication and we need the password and we need,
Yeah.
the tree ticket and all that stuff. So it's like it's becoming impossible for us, not impossible, but really complicated to not have a smartphone. So what kind of mental, spiritual, and emotional strength does it take to have boundaries with that? It's huge. And I don't have any answers because I struggle with it myself. But I think any spiritual practices where there are times of day or even full days a week where you do not touch technology are the way forward because in those moments, how quickly the imagination comes back, how
Yeah.
quickly ideas want to sprout, how quickly beauty overwhelms you by how close and present it always is, how vividly dreams return. So, one thing I really counsel is that people refuse to bring smartphones into your bedrooms. It's a killer of dreams. I don't have anything digital in my bedroom, not even a
Mhm.
digital clock. I use an analog clock. And I don't use an alarm clock. I never have. Um, and you can practice making your body clock be incredibly accurate.
Yeah.
It takes a bit of practice, but you can do that. And never, ever, ever use check your notifications first thing in the morning, because that, even if you only give yourself half an hour upon waking from dreams, you need to have that sacred time
Yes.
just to see what you dreamed, check in with yourself, even if it's just the way you feel if you don't remember a dream, or even to jot a few things down while you're drinking your coffee in your journal. You have to reclaim that imaginal space if you want to have any kind of mental stability in this world. And from there, you can grow those places. Maybe you observe Shabbat or a Sabbath, or maybe you observe not using devices an hour before bed just for sleep hygiene, or whatever your particular practice is. It's you need to grow that imaginal space, and And I've been experimenting with now taking sabbaticals, which, I'm privileged at this point in my life to be able to do that. I've only been able to take a couple of months off at a time. But even if you have holidays from work, consider, outlawing your smartphones
Yeah.
to try and reclaim and rehabilitate your imagination, because that is where all the wisdom comes from. That is where wisdom comes from. And so, if you want to have any sense of guidance, of spiritual anchoring, of ideas that are actually creative and not just repeating other people's ideas like a meme generator, that is the place you're going to need to come into relationship with.
This is so true. And I think it's a very, very hard thing to do nowadays. I think for many people living in this modern world, wherever it means, it's very complicated. As you said, they kind of even make it impossible to not to have smartphone or not to be addicted to the constant input of information, external noise. I also see it with myself. It's not also easy for me. Also, if you have your own practice, you run your business, not to give it as an excuse, but like you do use it for your own growth, your contact with your clients, whatsoever. But it's very like slippery slope. Where is this line between, oh, I'm really doing something productive, I'm really doing something that will bring me forward, whether, oh, I started just scrolling and just as you said, like my time is gone, my eyes are tired, I feel all confused and overwhelmed because we were not made to be able to process such amount of information. So we all confused and then we go to sleep and then surprise, we cannot remember our dreams or we are have restless nights or insomnia. It's like, as you said, if we don't go back and connect to this place of just pure curiosity, imagination, and even try to see like, hey, what happened inside of me if I just stop everything, even for an hour, right? I think an hour nowadays for people, that would be like climbing Mount Everest, no?
Indeed. Indeed. That's why I suggest just, starting small, whether it's half an hour in the morning or one day a week. And it's so magical. And I think you nailed it. I think what's really the difference is that, there are very positive ways to use that, you know, device and to be online for sure. It's so rich in resources, but we have to liberate conscious choice. And that means one of the things that helps me is thinking of it as corporations co-opting my imagination, because that is what's happening. When you go on social media, everything there is has been designed algorithmically to capture your attention, to alter the way you think, to keep you addicted. And so, and it's ultimately to get you to, and we don't, all those forces are invisible. We don't know what political powers are behind
Course.
those corporations. Some of them we do, but
Mm.
and we don't know what to trust anymore. And so it helps me to think of it that way, that when I go on to, whatever the news feed is of choice, that I am in vulnerability and danger of my imagination being co-opted. And I'm getting better at using it less and less and trying not to go down that slippery slope. But it is a really difficult practice. It's very, especially when you're tired or
Yes.
depleted, the first thing you do is, I don't want to, be conscious, right? You don't want to be conscious. It's like having a drink or getting stoned or any other form of addiction, eating chips, it does soothe you in a kind of unhealthy way. And there's nothing wrong with that, doing that from time to time. But if it becomes our whole life, which it quickly can be, then we really are giving away our originality, our conscious volition, and our medicine for the world world to somebody else. And so sometimes it helps me to think of it as a foe that I am in battle with.
Battle is definitely the right word for that. I can totally relate. I would really like to ask you about because for this podcast, for me, it's so important to also share about how our dreams, this connection to our inner knowing, the teacher that we have within us, that one way of connecting with, for me, it's through dream work, of course, through looking into our dreams, developing the relationship with our dreams. How is that for you? Like when you find yourself in a difficult situation, when there is an issue, a challenge, like, is there something that you do or a special way that you pay attention to your dreams? Or do you have any ritual or practice that is like special for those times?
That's a great question because it occurs to me that there is a reciprocal relationship with dreams, that we have to put into the imagination the nutrients that will allow it to thrive
Mm,
and to give us back its fruit. So if you think of it a little bit like a garden, well, if you neglect that garden, then all you're going to be doing is pulling weeds. And so this dovetails from our conversation about technology, because I think one of the first things you have to do is create a kind of reverence around your dreams. And for me, that may look like some of the things we're discussing about
yeah.
creating spaciousness. And that could look like, for instance, in the evening time, we as a family we do watch television shows, but we only choose things that are really wholesome and that are, we've gotten really into K-dramas. I don't know if you watch Korean dramas, but I love them so much because they're almost old-timey in a sense, because everything is so chaste and sweet, and
Yeah.
there's no violence, and it's just really quirky and charming, and these kinds of I can tell by your face that you do watch some K-dramas. You know what I'm talking about.
My niece exposed me, my 16-year-old niece exposed me to K-drama. So yes.
Yeah, so even things like children's programming or these sorts of things those are the only things that we'll watch in the evening, because it helps to soothe your spirit, especially in difficult times. Like right now, as we're recording this podcast, there's so much chaos in the world, so much division, so much outrage, so much anger, so much um, um, antagonism. And hardship, real hardship and war. And so if we are consuming all of that all the time, that is what we are going to dream about, because our dreams are going to try to help us work out all of those
Yeah.
complexities. But if we bring some balance to consuming all of the news and all of that, and bring some joy, bring some beauty, then that's going to help. And so I read a lot of nonfiction in my professional work, but at bedtime I read fiction.
Mm,
And so I lose myself in stories before bed. Stories are a wonderful way to help our dreams organize around archetypal patterns. Um, so those are two things I do before bed. I do not use screens from about 8:30 p.m. to bedtime. And then when I wake up, sometimes I fall off the wagon if it's a busy time and I have to check emails and I have
yeah.
early appointments. But most of the time I don't allow smartphones in my mornings too, so that I can harvest and pay attention and make a courtship of those images that came in my dreams. And all of my ideas, I write books and I
Yeah.
have a Substack. They all come from my dreams, every last one of them. Those are the sources of my images and inspiration. So I have to make time and energy for them, or else I would have nothing to say. Um, the other thing I do, of course, is spend a lot of time in nature, as
Mm.
much of it as I can every day. Try to walk outside, try to spend time with my cat, to be around trees, to be by the river, and to spend time with good friends. Anything that fills our soul, anything that brings us joy and helps us attune to beauty. These are practices that will give our dreams the kind of fertilizer that they need to produce helpful imagery. And so that's what I mean by reciprocity, that if we're constantly putting traumatic imagery and ideas and worries into our dreams, those are inevitably the kinds of dreams that we're going to receive back because our dreams are trying to help us work through the things we're focusing on.
Yeah, that's so true, and I really love this metaphor with fertilizer because it is true that our dreams, like they choose the symbols from the things that we are the most exposed to, right? That's why also every person dream symbols they are individual and only that they are personal because it's just takes the examples and the things that we are exposed in our waking life. So that's how we try to talk to us. So definitely, I think this advice of just in general exposing ourselves to beauty wherever the beauty is for us. It's nature, it's music, it's beautiful movies or beautiful conversation. It sounds so simple, but I feel it's not that simple nowadays, you know?
Yes, because you have to become sufficiently obsessed with something for it to, um, well, that's a strange way to word it, but I use it like that because if you want your dreams to respond uh, to something, it has to be something that's very deeply lodged in your heart and in your questions and in your obsession. And so I'll give you an example. You used the example of music, and well, it's true. Whatever your particular obsession is, whether you're a scientist who's trying to figure out a chemical formula, or whether you're a musician who's trying to find that perfect cadenza to bridge your your composition, or whether you are a writer who's writing about a particular topic that you're trying to understand its nuances and depths. It's only when your imagination is sufficiently overwhelmed and obsessed with that topic that your dreams will begin to galvanize with you
Mm.
behind it. and and so nowadays we seem to mostly be obsessed with whatever everybody else is talking about, right? There are these trends that come up on social media, and they take everybody by storm for a year or 2 years or whatever it is, and then they die down. And then the next obsession everybody gets onto. And if you want to participate that in that way, that's your choice. But think of all the other things you could be inventing and innovating and creating with your life if you turned away from the trends and asked yourself, what does my life want to express? What medicine do I in particular have to offer? And I think we need more of that. We need more people turning towards their own originality and becoming obsessed with it enough that their dreams might respond and that
Mm.
they might bring to fruition what I think the ecosystem really needs. And that's really what we're talking, this is my perspective when I talk about the dreaming way. I think that it's not just personal purpose that is expressing itself through our dreams, but that personal purpose fits into the larger ecosystem that is trying to heal and is trying to change consciousness. And so if all we're doing, we're putting into consciousness is stuff we already know and already talk about and already argue about, then we're not really listening to the ecosystem. And so it takes a kind of bravery to turn away from that collective chorus and instead listen to the internal promptings. It takes real bravery, and as we talked about, discipline. But this is my cheer for anybody who's out there who thinks they don't have something unique to offer.
Mm.
I say, of course you do. Of course you do, and we need it desperately. But the first thing you have to do is stop listening to what everybody else is saying and listen to what you in particular have to say in your unique way. Nobody is like you. And just like there's no oak tree exactly like the one that's in my backyard. And we need you to be uniquely yourself.
Oh, I love this so, so much, everything that you just said. And I think it's such a beautiful encouragement and a beautiful way to wrap our conversation that I could continue for another 5 hours. But to be respectful of your time, I would just like to ask, is there anything that you're planning, like a course or do you have any program or retreat happening anytime soon? And of course, where our listeners can find your amazing, amazing, I cannot say this enough, amazing books and more information about working with you in one way or another.
Thank you so much. Well, I do have a small private practice, but a lot of my energy goes into writing right now at this point in my life. I used to offer a lot more retreats,
Mhm.
but since traveling has become difficult and borders are complicated, I've just been focusing mostly on my books and also I have a Substack. I have only had it for about a year, but I do put a lot of energy in there. And so I try to offer a free newsletter on a monthly basis, but I also offer some, for my paid subscribers, I offer little audio snippets on a biweekly basis and then some special posts there. So that's the best way to keep in regular touch with me because that's where I put my energy. But yeah, I'll show you a copy of my book. This one has a lot of tabs in it. But this is my latest book. It's called The Dreaming Way. And I tried to put as much of the things that I've learned from my dreams into this book. It's quite dense, and so you can read it very slowly. You can even just pop in and out of it as if you want. But that's, and then my first book, which is called Belonging, is all about that longing to belong and that sense of a kind of epidemic loneliness that we feel. And I try in that book to connect it to the importance of dreams and finding that sense of belonging actually from the inside out instead of looking for it always on the outside. Um, so yeah, if you want to be on my mailing list, you can go to tokopa.com, which is toko-pa.com, toko-pa.com. And you'll probably put some links in your podcast notes for that, but it's very easy to sign up to my mailing list. And while I'm not the biggest emailer, when I do something in the world, I put it into that newsletter.
Yes, that's amazing. And I'm really looking forward actually, because I was really trying to get on one of your retreats in the previous years, but it never happened. We are on the opposite sides of the world. But if the opportunity ever comes again, I would really love that. And yes, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for your beautiful and soul nourishing writing. I love your books. I love your Substack. I am a big fan. And it really feels like, every time I open an email from you, it's like like you said, like some magic, it just enters my world. And through your words, I can feel this magic. And I think we so need it in our waking life, in our dream life, in our communities, and yeah, just everywhere. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, and thank you so much, Joanna, for being a light in these difficult times. You're a treasure, and we are so grateful to all you are offering to the world and for being one of those people out there who are, shouting from the rooftops about the brilliance and amazingness of dreams. And thank you, of course, for having me and for all your support. I look forward to our paths crossing again.
Me too.